Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Paul with ABFM, and I'm doing an interview today with a man named Paul Batey, who has also been interviewed in the past by Dean Esme. There's a link to that in the announcement to this interview on the site. You should go watch that too. But I wanted to speak with Paul just about Australia for a while. It's something that we get stories from a lot. It's something that's a big part of what's happening internationally in the mentality about men and boys. But you might be surprised to know, for instance, that 31% of the traffic to ABFM, according to Alexa, is from Australia, putting us in the top 1,000 websites being visited by Australians. Now, Alexa, like anything else, is subject to plenty of error. We don't consider this conclusive proof of anything, but it is a very strong indicator that with a 38% American audience versus 31% Australian, that there is a lot of popularity of the men's movement in that country, yet seeing it in action, we're not seeing as much as we would like to see, and that's not meant to be critical of Australians. There's great people like the 1 in 3 Foundation doing work. There is really good work going on, but in terms of commanding the media's attention and forcing them into a corner to talk about these issues the way that we have been very successful with, it has not happened so much in Australia. And I wanted to ask Paul Batey, a counselor, and if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'm going to read you his bio as we introduce him. Paul Batey is a guy in Sydney, Australia, and runs a counseling practice for men only. That's at supportforguys.com. He's part Aussie, part English, hence the weird accent, and 100% arsehole. Those are his words, not mine, folks. A frequent visitor to the U.S., he is concerned about the gender madness spreading to the already feminized continent of Australia. His number one concern and reason for being involved in the men's movement is the tragic proportion of male suicide. It all feeds into that, says Paul. And so with that, welcome very much, Paul Batey. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Paul. Nice to be here.
So tell me, let's just go ahead and get down to it. What do you make of this, that we have, our data shows that Australia, a population with less than 1/10 of the United States, comprises in the neighborhood of 30% of our overall traffic versus 38% for American traffic? What goes through your head when you hear something like that?
If I was to compare from what I've seen, I might be completely wrong about this, but from what I've seen, the difference between the US and Australia is in the US men face a harder task. You know, you can get jailed for not paying child support. The affirmative consent rules that have come into to universities that particularly affect young men. So in many ways, I think men in the US have got to the point where, you know, everyone reaches their point where they fight back, and I think that's happened in the US. Whereas I think in Australia, it's bad for men, but it's not quite at the tipping point where there is a huge voice, a huge outcry about it. I mean, there are organisations in Australia, but when, you know, I guess the main advocate for men's rights in Australia is you when you appear on Australian TV. It's
and that's something we need to remedy. We absolutely do. Let me dig a little bit deeper than this. And I understand what you're saying, that, okay, conditionally, things aren't quite as bad. I know, for instance, that they don't incarcerate men for failure to pay child support in Australia yet, and that there are a lot of things that are not quite as harsh on men in Australia as there are in the United States. Still, though, with the level of traffic that we're getting from Australia, and importantly, too, I'm going to sound like I'm kissing ass, and I need to, because we're making some critical observations, perhaps, about Australia, but some of our very biggest financial supporters and some of our very best activists come from Australia. I'm not trying to discount any of that. But it seems like there is, from the traffic numbers, there's a lot of consciousness about this, and a lot of generous Australians. Are they just really that generous people? They would just want to help out us poor American blokes deal with our system? Because it seems to me that there's something probably there in Australian culture that's not being as openly expressed as would be were it more permissible to speak.
Yeah, I think it's kind of. I mean, America has freedom of speech for a start, whereas Australia kind of has that by convention. It's not an actual explicit right. But I think there's a feeling there are some things that are just perhaps not acceptable to say, and it's kind of drummed out way before you get anywhere near the media. So it's like in social circles, in the workplace. That's where it's kind of weeded out, I think. But at the end of the day, the story is the same as I'm sure it is in America. Men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. So there is something deeply, deeply wrong in this country.
And we share that. I mean, in terms of conditions for men, not much difference between the U.S. and Australia, and it is and sort of gets worse as you do country by country examination in many places where you go from there. But is that part? I'm wondering sometimes if the part you talked about things not being acceptable to say, isn't part of this sort of requiring us to say the unacceptable?
Oh, for sure.
In order to make
for sure. And questioning it. There's a lot of double standards everywhere. Just to use general language, it's acceptable to say things like man cave, man flu, women are better at multitasking than men, and men. I mean, I just think that means that women are more capable of fucking up more than one thing at the same time, But if they're kind of taken as that's the way it is. It's a cultural thing. That's the way it is, and I don't think people stand up and say, "Well, hang on a minute, man flu, you're just sick, okay? There's no special man flu. Don't put yourself down for that. Man cave and." The expressions that are used to put down men, it's very, very insidious. It's very insidious, and I think men are their own worst enemies. They accept it. They don't want to piss off the little lady.
Yeah, believe me, we have no shortage of those men right here in my own country. There are millions upon millions of them. Do you think, we talked for a moment before we started about something that I was having trouble recalling, and we ended up identifying it as the tallest poppy syndrome. I had heard once, some years ago, that it was part of Australian culture to sort of subscribe to this idea that the tallest poppy is the one that's going to get whacked down first. Is that a truth that is part of Australian culture? Or is this
I think there's something in that. If you look at people that succeed in any particular area, usually acting or music or sport, there'll come a point where a switch gets flicked and people turn and want to bring that person down.
Gee, I've never heard of that happening before.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's purely an Australian thing. I mean, that's a phrase that's used quite a lot here.
Okay, yeah, and I just had somebody mention it in terms of Australians. I had no the idea of the validity or not. It was really a matter of just a lot of curiosity. Fact is, though, there is a lot of things related to Australia going on right now, which are very, very important issues in the men's movement. One of them that I wanted to bring up, and there was a Dr. Tavit, I believe his first name, Ahmed, who is a white ribbon ambassador for White Ribbon Australia. the people who love us so much. And he wrote a really brilliant, well-articulated, thoughtful piece about the need for balance in domestic violence research and treatment, and even went as far as to say that basically he's working in a system that's stuck in 1970s feminism. And it was an honest, on-target piece. Now, the White Ribbon Australia Foundation, to go after this esteemed psychiatrist, has decided he needs, I kid you not, people, re-education. He needs recommitment training from somebody with half his education and 1% of his expertise to train him how to analyze human behavior. Okay, this is not a training, this is ideological correction, and we know it. He should be, if he's talking to anybody, it should be to his academic peers. That's not even happening. But he has agreed, and we have his article now at whiteribbon.org. Thank you very much. It is in print there, and we are passing the word about that. So go to whiteribbon.org and read this article. It's really cool. But what do you make of all this play, Paul, about going from speaking a shocking truth? How could this guy not know that this was going to outrage people, to him turning around and agreeing to recommitment training and giving us permission to print his piece all at the same time? Is this strange to you? Am I the only one that feels this way?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could wax lyrical about White Ribbon for quite a while, Paul. But yeah, you're quite right in what you say. The article he wrote, there's no way any reasonable person could ever say it was misogynist or hated women. He was just simply pointing out that men can be victims of intimate partner violence, or whatever you want to call it, family violence, and that we have to be careful about making it a men-only problem, and also labeling women constantly as victims, because that doesn't serve women any good either.
Right.
And he got a slap on the wrist for it, and good boy. It's just ludicrous.
So do you have a prediction of what he's going to come out writing next? The 1 in 5 canard, or whether or not he'll go back and test the waters, telling the truth again?
You know, I don't. It's a hard one, but I think when someone's got that far to write an article like that, I don't think they're going to shut up. I'm not sure they are, because he's a smart guy. He's an intelligent guy, and you know, people, you know, educated, as you say, articulate, they don't want to be told not to say certain things. I know White Ribbon have said that he may publish articles, but he's not going to say he's associated with White Ribbon. So there's that bit of distance. Or if he wants to say that he's with White Ribbon, then it has to go through them for approval. Or slashing.
Wouldn't it be, and I'm just speculating out loud here, maybe fantasizing a little bit, in one of the few fantasies that are still left for 58-year-old men, but I can fantasize about the possibility of this particular White Ribbon ambassador becoming an ambassador for whiteribbon.org to Australia.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. And we're putting it out there, folks. We're very open to this, very actively interested. Who knows whether he would accept? I got nothing invested in the outcome.
You know, like his story generally isn't unusual, though, because I mean, I've heard you talk and Warren Farrell talk about their history, and I was the same. 10 years ago, I would have considered myself to be a feminist. But when you start digging into the figures, or bringing balance or pointing out things, and you start getting slammed down, then you think, well, hang on a minute. I'm just trying to present facts here, but I'm being told to shut up. Don't do that. We don't talk about those ones. Shh. We just talk about the ones that affect women. And it happens so many times when stats are quoted in the media. The one I saw recently is 1 in 3 boys think it's okay to hit a girl. You actually look at the study, and significantly more boys and girls, I think it was 70% of each, think it's okay for a girl to hit a boy. But that doesn't fit with the narrative. So when you start filtering out stuff, facts like that, you are really talking about an ideology. And so it's entirely possible that this might be the point at which he's trying to bring some sort of, I wouldn't even say balance, but just honesty into the whole thing. And he's being told you can't be honest. So he could. Wouldn't it be great if he turned into an ambassador for men's rights or White Ribbon?
Yes, and White Ribbon, to be sure. I mean, again, whiteribbon.org is not ABFM property. It belongs to Erin Pitsey, the founder of the Battered Women's Shelter Movement. It's entirely her deal. We do talk a lot about it, and we give the site the support of hosting, and all these things are ultimately her decision. But I'm just opinionating here that I would love to see it materialize, that this gentleman who's invested in the truth consider aligning himself with people who have really investigated domestic violence for decade after decade after decade, who have been the groundbreakers in initiating movements to address the problem, to sit and talk with them and consider how much healthier their message is than the one that White Ribbon Australia is delivering, which is as toxic as it could be.
You know, and there's a couple of things that really concern me about what White Ribbon does. I mean, one is that you've pointed out, and anyone watching this doesn't have to take your word for it. They can go to White Ribbon's site and look at their annual report, and you'll clearly see that it is an organisation that raises money to raise money and has a little bit of expenses going. They spend nothing on helping victims of domestic violence, women, men, whatever. But the way that they have somehow got into schools, and there was an article that the ABC had written by a female journalist, and she went to a school after the White Ribbon Day, and she talked to boys and girls, and paraphrasing it, the boys felt like shit. And for any organisation to go out of their way, and the result is that a child feels like shit, is just simply unacceptable. Unacceptable.
And gotta say, I wish that were true. I mean, it is unacceptable in the literal sense of the word, but that's the uphill battle we have, is that we live in a culture that only believes it really is acceptable. Absolute insanity. Let me ask you about another story, and I'll start it with how I found out about this. Just some time ago, one of my other Australian friends pinged me very early in my morning a link to a news story about a bunch of kids who had been murdered. There was 8 of them, I think, that were murdered. The eldest of the children, the brother, found the bodies. At the time that the news story hit, the mother was hospitalized with injuries. And they were obviously going on a big search for whoever did this horrible mass murder. And the moment I read it, I pinged back to my friend, it was her. And I considered at that time putting out a prediction, and I thought, well, if I eat, that's too much egg to have on my face if I'm wrong. So I chickened out. But I did consider at the time putting up a notice immediately on the site with the link to the story saying, I bet you anything she did it. Well, guess who did it? How much of a news item is this going on in Australia right now, Paul?
Right now, zero. Nothing. At the time when it happened, huge. And unlike yourself, many people, when the news broke, were making predictions, Paul. And there were people on your favourite program, Sunrise, over here, saying, oh, domestic violence is such a problem, we need to stop men being so bloody violent, men are bastards, women are just little flowers. Twitter was going mad with, oh, yet another tragedy caused by male domestic violence. And I thought the same as you. I thought, but I kept my mouth shut. And then And then, I mean, it's alleged at the moment. The case hasn't been heard, but my opinion is it looks not really good for her prospects of getting let off with this one. Um, so
I have a
something
question.
that
I want to know if you picked up on it in the story. You know that a friend of the family, they said, took the oldest son off to console him, away from everybody. Not a word about him going to the hospital to see his injured mother. That was one of my first big red herrings, is that they told us that somebody else in the family took him away from the mom immediately after this happened. And the other thing that caught my attention was that in the writing, the woman is not a suspect was used. Um,
right.
why do you tell people, shit, I'm not a suspect in it either. I didn't get my name in there. It, only feminist journalism would be responsible for that kind of copy, and I smelled a rat a mile off. Anyway, I've talked too long. You please go ahead, tell us more
Yeah,
about that story.
I don't think you've got to be Columbo to join the dots on it. To be honest, you know. I mean, as soon as as soon as the reports came out, 8 children, 7 of her own children, and her niece were dead. The mother was taken to hospital with minor knife wounds. That's not good.
That'll
I,
happen. That'll happen when you stab 8 people to death.
yeah, and you know we've just had. Look, I guess the subject of filicide, child murder, is back in the news again from the men are bastards point of view because we Australia can be a little bit of an insecure country. So every year we have Australia Day and we name the Australian of the year. And before anyone says I'm bashing women here, the last recipient I know of that was a good one was Fiona Wood, who invented a new treatment for burns. I mean, if you're going to have an Australian of the Year, which is a stupid award in the first place, that's the sort of person that should be getting it. This year it was awarded to a woman called Rosie Batey, whose son was killed a year ago by the father. Complete nut job. And so that's brought back into the media questions about domestic violence, and you know, I mean, they sort of forget the bit that the victim of the crime was a boy, for one thing, but also the actual statistics on filicide, where it's family related, 50% mother, 25% father, 25% some psycho that the mother happens to be fucking at the time. So it's 50-50 male-female. I guess my whole thing about this is it's to simplify it down to a gender issue is not doing anything to address the problem. It's not a gender issue. There's so many other factors. To say it's just men, it's just women, you know, people are going to keep being on the receiving end of this.
Well, it's the furthest of the relevant data. When you start taking into account things like substance abuse, family history of abuse, unemployment, undereducation, even malnourishment, you can take all those factors. Those are the major players, particularly from family history, a learned pattern of behavior that's passed down generationally. All that stuff is the causes of domestic violence. And we live in a culture so blind to it that they sit there and accept this gendered domestic violence happens because men are innately bad. You know, what can I say except how do we get Australia to pay more attention to this? Because I can promise you the story of the homicide, which I do believe that Australian White Ribbon has been dead silent on, of course, because it doesn't fit their narrative. The fact that their own people are telling them that they're out of the times, that they're not doing scientific approach to this problem. Come White Ribbon Day next year, we're going to be very, very hard at work here getting this out. And I hope that they get the message that all they have to do is like listen to Dr. Ahmed and start fulfilling their promise. But even is pointed out, and I forgot her name, but she's one of the top feminist journalists, I use that term loosely, in Australia, in writing about this, and she even criticized White Ribbon as an organization for raising money and not doing jack shit with it.
I know, there's an interesting thing there because, we are opposed to White Ribbon for one reason, but there's also a lot of feminists that are opposed to White Ribbon for different reasons. It's interesting sometimes two people, polar opposites, both think the same thing. Well, White Ribbon, the big joke of White Ribbon is that one of their big claims is, I don't know what the number is, but we'll just say 50 billion men have signed our online pledge not to hit a woman. And you just think that if you have the kind of man that they picture in their adverts, the big towering hulk of a brute with the cowering woman in the corner, and he's just about to belt 7 tons of shit out of her, and this voice goes off in his head, but you signed the pledge, the pledge, the pledge.
And then yes, it will stop it. Absolutely. And of course, if your sole purpose, and you spend $2 million a year getting people to sign a petition and paying yourself to get people to sign a petition, and that's what you do, then I'm not even surprised that feminists are criticizing them. But it's over the money because feminists want it. What White Ribbon has done is that a small group of people have figured out how to cash in without including anybody on the pie, strictly for themselves, and the ideologues don't like that. They want a piece of that action. That's their fucking money. And that's the friction that will develop if any more does, but they seem to be willing to sacrifice a lot just to stay, in lockstep with the message.
Well, out of the $2 million, there's an awful lot of travel expenses and miscellaneous.
There was well over $250,000 in 1 year in travel and hotels, and I'm sure they stayed at very economical places too.
Formula One, Holiday Inn.
Yes, that sort of thing. But yeah, so you've done. When you say things aren't as bad for men in Australia, I agree with you. But in terms of the gender ideology corruption, Australia's pretty high up there on the list.
In some respects, I would say it's in some respects it's kind of ahead on the US because it's, like I said, it's kind of the accepted cultural norm that if something bad happens, it's a man's fault. I wouldn't be surprised, just going back to the Cairns murder, when the trial occurs, that people will come out and say she did it because she was a victim of domestic abuse. So ultimately, it was a man's fault. That's where I think it will head. And men.
If I can stop you for a moment, I just want to tell a little vignette here that I think you'll find is funny. We had many years ago now a woman named Andrea Yates here where I live drown her 5 children in a bathtub. She was convicted of murder. It was overturned, and she's sent to a psychiatric facility. The state did prove that she had planned it. She had snuck around with things to make sure nobody was going to be there. She had consciousness of what she was doing, and by legal standards, the insanity should not have held. But I went, the day after this hit the newspapers, I went to get a haircut, and this is when I was still going into salons instead. Note to self, never go to another salon again. This young Hispanic woman was cutting my hair, obviously an immigrant, sort of broken English, and as she's cutting, the thing came up on the news screen, and she leaned over and said, they say it was the man's fault.
But the other cultural thing I think that's happening in Australia is I think men get told an awful lot what a real man is. If you behave in a certain way, you're not a real man, or you're just bitter, you're just twisted, you're a misogynist. I'm a single bloke. I get it all the time, and it's funny. I get on the one hand you're just angry, and then they'll say, how come you're happy all the time? So I don't know how that works, but so not a real man.
I get that too.
Yeah, there's quite, and I use the pun, there is quite a large fat acceptance movement going on, where big is beautiful. It doesn't matter how many donuts a woman eats, and I don't, go ahead and eat the donuts. Be as fat as you like, but I'm not going to fuck you. And any man that doesn't find it attractive, it doesn't make them a real man. It doesn't make them not a real man. Some women don't like bald guys, but I don't think they're retarded. It's just, but yet you're not a real man. You have to find a 200-pound woman attractive. If you don't, Paul, then there's something wrong with you.
Exactly, of course, and there are guys that prefer large women. More power to them. I mean, whose possible business is it what you are attracted to? This is the level of human micromanagement that just boggles the mind when it comes to feminists. They actually think they can create a social narrative to make you think that, for instance, I don't like ultra skinny anorexic Auschwitz-looking girls. Don't like it at all. The just the boniness and the twiggy look from the '60s. Much more of like a Raquel Welch type aficionado of women. Some meat on them and fine. But imagine somebody trying to tell me, well, no, Paul, you can't be attracted to those proportions. You have to be attracted to this stick figure. That's what has to sexually excite you for you to be a man. I'm sorry, but you know what? Fuck you.
Yeah.
I'll enjoy what I'm going to enjoy, and I will be glad when the day comes when we see a lot more men standing up to that nonsense and saying that's just total crap.
Yeah, yeah, and this is probably speaking from a Sydney perspective. From people I've talked to around Australia, I think it's the same, but the level of female entitlement here is very, 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 very high. Very high. They deserve everything as well. You kind of got to work to get things, and practice and put the hours in. You don't just get given stuff. It's crazy.
Let me throw a quote at you, and I would like to add, this is spontaneous because it's just something that hit my mind from years ago that I heard somebody say. I don't know if there's any truth to it at all, but I've just got to hear Paul's reaction to this. And this came, mind you, from the mouth of an American psychotherapist, a female. She said, the women in Australia go to Bali to get lovers because men in Australia are such pigs.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? There might be some truth in that, but I'd say a lot of Australian men are just pussies. They're just beaten dogs. Beaten dogs. I've heard the same thing happens in America. Woman gets a man and then changes him and sucks the living soul out of the guy, and then gets bored with him, and the guy comes out the other end. And quite a bit of the work I do with clients is quite often after they've come out of a relationship, and these guys are just broken through years of Chinese water torture. It's horrendous. But I think Australians, there is no big voice in Australia, so they do look to the likes of a Voice for Men. The Tom Leykis show is quite popular among a lot of people here. That's where I first heard of you. And again, Tom is one of those people that gets branded as a misogynist, But when he speaks to a woman, you hear the compassion. He doesn't hate women. He just hates this whole inequity that affects a lot of American men.
And he refuses to participate in it, which is why they're so down.
Of course, yeah. If you're not married, then you've got to be some sort of freak. But the thing that's interesting about America is, and I read Helen Men on Strike, Dr. Helen Smith.
Yes.
Yeah. there are some major demographic shifts occurring in the US that are not quite happening here yet. So, in your last census, 51% of adults are now single for the first time. Most adults are single, whereas
Yep.
in Australia it's 38% are single. So it's still, it's not a small amount, and it's growing. And I think those are the only things that may affect change. I don't know. I don't know when things are going to come back on balance. Does it have to get a bit worse before it comes back, or I don't know. What do you think, Paul?
I think that's the whole way that the social ship turns. I think we have waves and trends that eventually backwash over each other, that come to a stop, a halt. I think feminism has certainly seen better days than they have seen recently, and they have some very bad days ahead. I think that the momentum is coming, and there's little to nothing anybody can do about it. There is, people look to ABFM. If ABFM was pulled down tonight, it would only be a few months before somebody had a similar replacement up, because now there's a real audience for it. So we're too far down that road. Let me ask you, while I got you in the few minutes that we have left. Now, you're a counselor, and what's the name of your website again?
Support4guys.com.
Is that FOR?
FOR.
Support4guys.com. You have a counseling practice where you only deal with male clients.
Yes.
You're very obviously of what I think most people would call a more red pill mentality than your average counselor, that's for sure. Yeah, but no, that's going to be another hour. We won't get into that. But what is it? I'm curious, because I know that I spent years counseling men here in the States, and I know the litany of things that they seem to prioritize in wanting help with. What is that like for Australian men? What's your most common requests from people when they say they have a problem they want to work on?
That's an interesting one, because when I started out, my main focus, or my main goal was addiction, alcohol, and other drugs. I do some of that, but it's mainly self-esteem, poor self-image, either through generally coming through the way they were treated as a child, or through a long-term relationship. These guys, they've kind of just lost their way a little bit, which is kind of good in a way, because it doesn't actually take that much to set things back on a keel often. But unfortunately, there aren't many services for men, and I think counselling for men, I've learned that I have to take a slightly different approach than I guess the textbooks would say as well.
God, I hope so.
Yeah. I know. I mean, Tom Golden's written some great books about this, the way men heal. It's fantastic that men are more inclined to want to perform actions, and so whenever they go to counsellors, generally it's all about exposing about how you feel and da 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 da. And there's a place for that, but the whole masculine side gets completely ignored, I think, in counselling as well.
Oh, sure it does. But we're again, I think, more evidence of what we've been talking about. I mean, you're just popping up. You heard about us on Tom Likas popping up, now having this discussion, and the man who wrote the White Ribbon piece that upset him so, as a licensed psychiatrist. That's going to happen more. But I think you struck on something really central. Just want to spend another minute on that. And it's something we don't talk about much, the idea of self-esteem in men.
Yeah.
It sounds psychobablish, it sounds touchy-feely chicken soup shit, but on the other hand, there is real implications to the way you see yourself as a human being. There are very real
sure.
Implications for how you're going to behave and handle problems and everything else based on your personal belief structure. So I think it's real important that more men get okay with the idea of that type of self-examination, because I think what we find is that whether it's childhood or bad relationships, there's also a very pervasive problem culturally across the planet that it is you're not a human being, you're a human doing, that everything you are is measured by what you perform, and what you perform is never enough. That is a repeating cycle of diminishing self-esteem that permeates the lives of most men. I really believe none of us will ever fully get rid of that. But I'm really glad to hear that you're engaging these guys on the level of starting to looking at their own humanity.
For sure.
Because that is the key to all this for me.
Yeah, and also as well as major relationships in their life. There's, you know, you turn on the TV any time of the day, and you're going to see either men drinking beer or just being complete fucking idiots. That's what men are. And so, I mean, that's been on the increase for, you know, I'd say, I'm going to pluck a number out of my ass here. Sorry, ass. I'd say like 10 or 15 years. So we're going to start to see boys that have been growing up exposed to this idea that men are complete idiots. And, you know, I think when these people become adults,
well, we've already got them in our colleges participating in slut walks.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
I mean, that's what we've done to them, and the generations that came before have some real culpability in standing by and silently as all this shit was allowed to happen.
Oh man, slut walk, God's sake! Or the walk a mile in my shoes, guys walking.
Oh yes.
Oh, what?
You know what I want to see one day? I want to see walk a mile in my boots, and I want to see a bunch of women come out and put 70-pound packs on their backs and hold a rifle at port arms wearing combat boots and do a force march like that. Walk a mile in his shoes. Why not?
Yeah.
I wonder how many people will turn out for that one, Paul.
Absolutely zero, wouldn't it? You know, there's no headline or story in that. You know, it just, you know, and all of this preys on a very natural instinct, I think, that men have to be, you know, generally to be protective. And so when you're told in the media that there is a domestic violence problem and women are getting beaten up, yeah, of course that's shit. Men just know that that's wrong. You know, you can't do that. But it's so sad that there are so many men that are victims that they're completely ignored. No services, no funding for anything. You know, there was the Australia of the Year released this domestic violence app on the weekend, and the quote that they used in all the press was, you know, because it's disgusting, because 22% of women under 20 have experienced intimate partner violence. And you read that and you think, that's fucked, you know? You go and actually find the report and read the report, and it says, broadly speaking, the victimization is the same for men and women. But that just doesn't fit into the ideology. Can't say that.
Can't make money off of whole truths. Has to be half truths in this field. That's how they do it. And I do also just have to wonder out loud that these guys that are victims of domestic violence, and some of it is very brutal violence with very severe consequences. They go to places and get laughed out or referred to a batterers program, because that's the only help available. You think maybe, Paul, that could have an impact on self-esteem?
Oh, just a bit, you know. And I think the men's rights people tend to look at it in a different way, because feminists, who I would describe as fat polka dot wearing people with fringes, I'm talking about that kind of feminist, they take a domestic violence story and blow it up to say this is what men are like. Whereas when we look at the figures and we see that men are also the victim, we're not for a second saying that women are all capable of doing that at all. You know, it's just so, you know, it's one of the few demographics that it's still acceptable to say, well, if one person does this of a particular gender, then we can say that generally about all men. All men have got this problem. You can't say that about anything else because it's ridiculous.
Well, and with men, you can do it on both ends of the bell curve. You can point to the 0.005% that are at the very top in power running the world and say, those are all what men are like. And then you can go the other end of the bell curve where the scumbags and the murderers and the rapists actually are that extreme minority in and say, no, that's what all men are at. Just whichever serves me getting money right now, that's the group I'm going to point at. If I need to raise money on the wage gap myth, then I'm going to point at the guys running the world. And if I'm going to talk about how I'm a victim, I'm going to point at the guys who the world has crushed under the bars of prison. Ta-da! Feminism in a nutshell, folks.
Just on the low end of the scale, there was a campaign about homelessness, and the poster had a woman there, and it said 40% of homeless people are women. And it's like, well, what's the other 60%? They're not tomatoes, for fuck's sake.
Well, yes, there's that. I remember seeing a flyer where at one point they went on an alert in the VA because they had discovered that 15% of homeless vets were female. That was the crisis that needed to be addressed. Only time in my life I ever tore a poster down. I ripped it to shreds and laughed while I was doing it. It was the most disgusting thing. 15%. So the 85% don't matter, folks.
Yeah.
No, nothing to see here. Move along.
Just a quick thing on the whole red pill and counselling. I mean, the sort of stuff I've been saying to you today is not what I do when I'm counselling. But I think men understand that. When they talk to me, I don't have the biased opinion that, well, you will be happy if you find a woman and get married, which a lot of counsellors do have that bent. But on the other hand, like if a man is married and the marriage is good, but there are aspects about his life he doesn't like, I'm also not going to say, well, you should leave your fucking wife, you know. I think I have a bit more.
Your clients right where they're at and work with them from their own deal, man. What kind of fucking therapist does that shit?
Well, you know, you learn that people are the best fixers of their own problems. So I'm not going to tell someone out to live their fucking life. You know, that's ridiculous. You know,
I used to just tell my clients that their lives would improve if they got a better haircut.
Grow a beard.
Yeah, grow a beard. That'll make you happy. Yeah, whatever. But yeah, I'm glad and not surprised to hear that you actually meet your clients where they at and determine what they think is help and what their needs are and help them walk toward that, which is always makes a good counselor, and nothing else does.
No.
I will say that with arrogant finality. Nothing, anybody that's not looking at you and trying to figure out who you are, what you really need, what you really want, what's important to you, what's hurting you, what makes you happy. If your counselor doesn't understand you on that level, you got somebody that's full of shit. And the other part is they got to be invested in making those things happen for you. If you don't have that, you don't have a therapist, you have somebody that's just collecting your money.
Yeah, and I also got to say that, you know, I don't counsel women, but I do know a female counsellor who I think is absolutely fantastic, and so
anyway, some great female counselors. I know plenty. I've seen some really good clinicians of both sexes. Unfortunately, I've seen horrific numbers more that I would not let walk my dog across the street. I mean, dangerously pathogenic. A whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at whiteribbon.org, White Ribbon Australia. The crazy of the American Psychological Association, Division 51. This is the Society for the Study of Men and Masculinity. Is just a feminist cesspool of liars and con artists. Pick your counselors careful, folks.
Yeah, there's one more stat that the White Ribbon and lots of people pluck out. They say one woman dies every week in Australia as a victim of domestic violence. That's quite correct. But if you put it as two women die every 2 weeks, and you look at the figures, you will also see that 1.5 men also die in the same circumstances every 2 weeks.
You're in breach of the information boundary yet again, Mr. Batey.
Sorry, Paul.
We cannot have these inconvenient facts deter us from helping feminists line their pockets. Well, we are about out of time. We've gone right about normal show time. I have enjoyed this talk immensely. I want to offer you the chance to add anything final that you would like to say about anything we've talked about.
Well, I take Tom Golden's approach, really. I like what Tom says. Men are good. I wouldn't do the job I do if I didn't have some sort of underlying faith in humanity. And I think men and women have got the capacity to achieve great things in their life. And feminism stops that. It stops men, and it stops women from achieving their potential too. That's the sad thing about it.
Indeed, sucks the humanity out of everything that was ever worthwhile between human beings, whether it was men and women or men and men or women and women. The whole deal just takes the human factor out of all of it. And it's a very sad thing, but it's been very enjoyable speaking with you about it, and I would like to put you on the spot publicly and say I would very much like to have you come back for some more interviews and more discussions about the more a little about some of the mental health aspects that men face in the area of self-esteem.
Thank you very much, Paul.
All right, with that, I wish everybody a happy day. Have fun. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.